Thank you for joining Fidelity Charitable's presentation, Lessons from a Philanthropic Leader, a Conversation with Darren Walker. As a reminder, the views and opinions of the speakers are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of Fidelity Charitable. Fidelity Charitable does not guarantee the accuracy of the information delivered. We encourage you to explore a wide variety of sources, including the information we've shared today, in implementing your charitable giving strategies and values. Now I'd like to introduce today's moderator, the president of Fidelity Charitable, Pamela Norley.
Great. So hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. So from COVID-19 to racial injustice to economic uncertainty, we're living in a tragically upside down world. With all that's going on, the need for philanthropy has never been more in demand. And I'm so pleased to share with you that Fidelity Charitable donors are continuing to grant to nonprofits at record levels. Through today, our donors have recommended more than $4.5 billion in grants to over 130,000 nonprofits. But we all know that that's not yet enough. And I encourage you to continue using your giving accounts to grant even more to support the many nonprofits that are working to address all the issues that we're facing now across the world. Fidelity Charitable remains your partner in giving, and we understand that your approach to giving has changed over the last 5 months. With more of you giving to address food insecurity and homelessness for sometimes the first time, while also giving to protect education and the environment and the arts. So we host these virtual conversations to provide insights and ideas and inspiration to help you navigate this new normal and to be a more effective grant maker. So with that in mind, I'm so honored to welcome today's guest speaker, Darren Walker, a philanthropist, visionary, and leader in the nonprofit sector for decades. And thank you so much for joining us, Darren. It's so great to have you here. Darren is the president of the Ford Foundation as an international social justice institution with a mission to strengthen democracy. Darren has an extensive list of accomplishments. In fact, we spend the whole 30 minutes talking about all of his accomplishments. So you can read his biography there in the bottom of your screen. And we've also provided a lot of his writing and readings, and we encourage you to learn more about the amazing things that he's done. So I first had the privilege of meeting Darren through our U.S. Impact Investing Alliance, which is an organization dedicated to raising awareness on impact investing and fostering of deployment of impact capital. Darren's an innovator, a thought leader, who's dedicated his career to seeking justice for all. So to start, I want to share a passage from his recent book, which, by the way, he didn't ask us to talk about at all, but it's an amazing book that I have found so much guidance and information, particularly over these last few months. And so the recent passage starts with, "Never has the world experienced so much inequality. Thanks to major advances in technology, new entrepreneurs fundamentally transform the way people live and work. But these titans of industry also accumulate wealth in an astounding scale, while the vast majority remain in poverty. Around the world, there are grand disparities in how people are treated, who can access education and economic opportunity, which groups are free to express themselves, participate in democracy. Even in the most progressive democratic countries, institutions continue to exclude low-income people, women, the disabled, ethnic and religious minorities, indigenous people, people of color, and others." This excerpt from Darren's book describes not the state of the world today, but rather the state of the world in 1889, as written by American industrialist and an early philanthropist, Andrew Carnegie. So, Darren, your book, From Generosity to Justice, shares your insight on the new gospel of wealth. Can we start there and talk about what you mean from generosity to justice?
Sure. And thank you, Pam. I'm so honored that you invited me, and it's always great to see you and be with you. I wrote the book, From Generosity to Justice, because I learned about organized philanthropy, as most people do, and that is through the words of the great philanthropists John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and others. And Carnegie wrote in 1889 a seminal essay called The Gospel of Wealth, in which he laid out the tenets of what would become American philanthropy. And in it, he talks about generosity and charity Now, Carnegie never questioned the inequality around him. He said that the inequality in the economy was a natural phenomenon, and the fact that men like him and Rockefeller had so much wealth was not a problem. The only question was how to give away that wealth to ameliorate and to provide charitable support for those less fortunate. In 1968, Dr. King also talked about philanthropy. And what he said is the following: philanthropy is commendable, but it should not allow the philanthropist to overlook the economic injustice which makes philanthropy necessary. So King challenged Carnegie's idea that inequality and injustice was just simply a natural phenomenon. And he said that actually there were intentional things that wealthy men like Carnegie and Rockefeller did that were actually harmful and brought about injustice, and that philanthropists should think about the injustice that might come from the accumulation of their wealth. And so generosity and charity are important and are necessary, but justice and dignity, I believe, is and must be the work of philanthropy. And so that's why the book has this dialectic between generosity and justice, charity and dignity.
Yeah, good. So going back to the tenets, you outline those obviously in your book, and you said, listen, modern day philanthropists should be exploring and embracing them and their respective journeys to address inequality. And you point out that each one of these tenets in its own ways answers that important question, which is, how can you move along the continuum to go from generosity to justice? So we want to just share the list of all 7 here with our audience. But I just want to focus on 2 of them, given our time here today. And the tenets we wanted to kind of talk with you about, Darren, are working to raise the roots by addressing causes, not consequences, and elaborate on what you mean by that. And then harnessing the power of proximity, talking about the value of expertise, but also experience. So let's talk a little bit about raising roots by addressing causes. What do you mean by that? If you could tell a little story about that.
Sure. I think I know that many of your donors support issues around criminal justice reform and, for example, ending mass incarceration, which really has the consequences of over-incarceration, of the criminalization of literally millions of Americans. There are root cause issues that generate the outcomes that have consequences primarily for Black and brown men in America, and increasingly women. And the root of that is the racist intent that was baked into our modern day justice system, beginning with our war on drugs. Yeah. If you look at the origins of that effort, it had racist intent. In fact, John Ehrlichman talked about the intent of criminalizing African Americans, and that had the effect ultimately of succeeding through a series of policies and laws that both Democrats and Republicans participated in, that made it harder for African Americans and Latinx men to not be ensnared in the criminal justice system. So what we are interested in is not funding an employment program, although we do fund employment programs for reentering citizens. It's asking, why do we have so much incarceration, and what causes that? And so let's deconstruct that at its root. What causes that is a cash bail system. And so let's attack the issue of cash bail and change that system so that we don't create profit from poverty. The fact that a person is poor and they can't post bail is why they're in the jail, right? There's been no case adjudicated against them. If it were me or you, Pam, we could post bail and be out, right? And so we want to look at those kinds of root cause issues, and we support the organizations like the NAACP Legal Defense Fund or Color of Change or the Vera Institute for Justice, who are doing the research, the analysis, and the advocacy to change that system.
Good. So those are the nonprofits that are working at getting at those root causes to address that incarceration you mentioned. How do you as a donor to be able to become skilled at kind of understanding how to find those root cause organizations to support if we want to drive the change that we're talking about?
I think there are so many great resources, and I know Fidelity does a terrific job of bringing those resources to your clients. Those resources are networks. So even, for example, in the criminal justice space, there are networks of donors. There are organizations who provide information, who provide updates, real-time analysis of what's happening state by state in terms of reform. And so I think it is plugging into many of those networks, and those networks sometimes exist within regional grant-making associations. Most of the regional grant makers across the country are very good resources for this kind of information. Who are the best groups funding in a particular space?
Good. Thanks. That's very helpful. So now let's turn to the other tenet around harnessing the power of proximity. You know, valuing both the expertise on a particular issue, but also experience. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that, Pam, is that we, people like us, value credentialed expertise and knowledge. And we need that expertise and knowledge. But sometimes we overlook the opinions and perspectives of the communities, the people closest to the problems we want to solve. And that's been a big issue. It was something that we experienced at the Ford Foundation and at Rockefeller before, the critique that we weren't listening in our international program. Did we give as much credence to the perspectives of the African villager as we gave to the person who had a PhD in anthropology? And how do we listen to both, but not be disrespectful, particularly of the voices closest to the communities we're trying to impact?
So does that mean you need to volunteer where you're giving your time? You need to spend time with in those communities in different ways? How do donors get that experience?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think for most donors give to lots of different things, but I also find that many donors want to start to concentrate and may have a passion for education. Well, if you do, then you should spend some time with educators, with schools, with teachers, and hearing and learning about their challenges. And I think whether it's that or whether it's community development and spending time with organizations working on community development, how to structure those sometimes is a challenge, but it is surmountable. And the value that comes, and we see this because I'm sure you and I serve on lots of nonprofit boards, and we see the value of actually being engaged and being closer to the problem.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Let me now, switch over to COVID-19, and I know you're involved in a lot of different organizations that are working to get New York back to business. I know you've been involved with the government, but this has been obviously incredibly disruptive to the nonprofit sector. These not only have now constrained resources because they can't do fundraising, they can't do their annual galas. They also challenges in terms of soliciting volunteers to feel safe kind of coming in and contributing, so their resources are down. We also know nonprofits are the third largest employer in our economy. And I know you and I talked after, we went into quarantine, and you talked about, the Ford Foundation trying to find as much, as the ultimate resources you could have to try to address how you could be innovative and make sure that, the most money was going out. But there's constraints around that. So you came up with some innovative ways. And can you share with our audience here some of the things the Ford Foundation has been doing to try to free up more capital to support a COVID response?
Sure. I mean, I think when you and I talked back in March and April, things were pretty ominous and very, very worrisome. In that moment, as I started to talk with the trustees of the foundation about what we could do, one of the things that came up, of course, was, well, our endowment is down. I mean, back in March and April, as you remember, we had lost significant value. The Ford Foundation had lost, we'd lost all of about $3 billion. And so our investment advisors, of course, said this is not the time to liquidate the endowment. And so we'll need to come up with some other way. And what I thought about was, and was inspired by, was the Fed policy, the change that basically brought the Fed funds rate to zero, made it really clear that there would be an opportunity for a AAA credit like the Ford Foundation to issue debt. And in fact, that was what we ultimately did. We issued a $1 billion first of its kind social bond. And that gave us the capital to almost double our grant making, which is between 550 and 600 a year. And so for the next 2 years, it'll be 1.1 billion each year. And that's just been a huge boon, because what we have done with that is to double down on the key institutions, the mission critical organizations working on the frontline justice issues in this country, and to also provide support for the kinds of things that may not normally be our key, supporting social services, supporting organizations working on homeless services, for example. And so that's made it possible for us to just bring a lot of good news, because as you say, the nonprofits, Pam, are in a very, very precarious state right now. I mean, I was just on the phone yesterday with one of the leading theaters. They are now realizing that even the spring of 2021, their theater is going to be dark, and they are going to still need some resources to get through this.
Yeah. So obviously, there's a lot of choices that the Ford Foundation has in terms of looking at organizations that you support. Can you share with our donors how you think about evaluating which organizations over others that you support for social justice, COVID response, arts, etc.?
So we take an equity lens to our grant making. We are very interested in supporting those organizations who have traditionally been under-resourced. And what that has meant is that an increasing share of our grant making is going to organizations that are led by and serve African American communities, indigenous people of color communities. And that is a fundamental analysis and sift that we bring to the work. And what that means, Pam, let's just go back to the arts, which we were just talking about. What that means is we are more likely to fund an arts organization like Dance Theater of Harlem in our dance program, or Alvin Ailey or Ballet Hispanico. Those are more likely in our dance program, our arts program, to be funded than, say, New York City Ballet, where I've been on the board for many years. But as a matter of fundraising capacity, the membership of its board, New York City Ballet is in a class of its own. And Dance Theater of Harlem could only dream of having a board like that and the resources. And so we tend to fund in that direction. And so we ask ourselves, who are doing the important work and who's been historically under-resourced, and how do we resource them? Primarily with general operating support and with technical assistance.
Good. Yeah, no, and it's good to hear that you're doing that with what we call kind of infrastructure, general operating support, because that's the place where the nonprofits particularly need it now to sustain their
all
talent.
The surveys say that.
Yeah, but it's the area that's least supported, as you know. Well, that's terrific to hear. So, we are, as I announced at the top of the webinar, that we're at 4.4 billion. We're hoping to double that by the end of the year.
That's really amazing,
donors,
Pam. I mean, it's really kudos to you and your colleagues and your donors. It's just that's an amazing data point.
Well, and I think it's the team at Fidelity Charitable that every day works to make sure that our donors are having a great experience, that we can get the money out the door really quickly. I mean, that 4.4 to 130,000 charities represents over almost 1 million transactions, right? Like that for a year. So the team is really stretched, but we are hiring and bringing on as many resources as we can to continue, because we're hoping and asking and really very optimistic that we're going to see continued granting, because people understanding the severe need that there is, and they've got ready deployable capital in their DAFs to be able to do that. What advice? So, our donors are now, we're 5 months into this, we're going into the fall, any way for them to be thinking about how their charity should be managed these next 6 months and even into the next year? Is there things that you're thinking about it forward, both in the short and medium term, that maybe that we might want to share with our donors?
I think in the short term, it is the question of services. And most of your donors are focused on their local community and their region. And I think the organizations who are providing those social services are strapped, and the human services community of organizations need support. I think longer term, we have some fundamental challenges facing our nation that are broader than a neighborhood charity, but that are fundamentally about our democracy, what kind of democracy we want to have, and who we want to be as a people. And I think there are organizations engaged in those questions, engaged in building bridges between communities, because that is what we need now in our democracy. We need to strengthen the relationships between our communities. We need to strengthen the key institutions of our democracy so that they are fortified and resilient for, I think, some very difficult days ahead. So we are focused on everything from supporting voting in the election to supporting the kinds of research that we're going to need to understand the longer term effects of COVID on American people.
Yeah. No, that's good to be thinking about research right now. There's a lot of organizations doing really good thinking around these issues. So we have some questions, a lot of questions coming in. I want to take a few minutes to see if we can touch on some of them. Somebody has written in, what do you wish we could stop, start, and continue in philanthropy?
I wish we could start providing more general operating support. I wish that we in philanthropy could be willing to give up some of our control and cede that to the very effective nonprofit leaders who know best how to allocate the resources that they are provided. So give more general operating support. I wish we would stop that. We would stop giving project support and start giving more general operating support. That's my number one wish.
Well, you're speaking to the converted on that. I think we've seen three things really in these transformative moments of philanthropy since COVID. One is that people are giving with a sense of urgency, and we're encouraging them to keep that up. Two is they are giving unrestricted. I mean, we've shared stories with our donors, and our donors have shared stories with us of people having earmarked things for a particular program, and now it's just whatever you need this for. You make sure that you put these dollars to work in your best interest. And most of the people that have joined us really encouraging that. So I agree with that. And then the third thing we're seeing a lot of is that people are giving more in collaboration. I know even with the social bond, you're working with other foundations to provide structures to be able to free up more capital. Another question here is, what are some non-financial result metrics that might be considered in grant decisions? So as you know, certain donors, many donors are very focused on quantifiably driven impact results that they can feel good about. But what are other things that they should be thinking about that are kind of non-financial result, or as they think about their giving?
I think we should think about diversity and inclusion and what a board looks like,
Yeah.
what the leadership team looks like. To the extent that that there are indicators of more diversity, it is more likely to be a successful organization longer term, particularly if it is working to fight poverty or inequality or injustice, where people of color and diverse people live and work and are engaged and are impacted.
Yeah, by the way, that last question came from Al Osborne, our chair here at Fidelity Charitable, our famous chair. He wants to pass along his thanks.
He's the best. Hi, Al.
He is. I know. He's got a lot of fans. This other question here is: you've talked about disrupting inequality on fundamental causes, economic, systemic racism notwithstanding. How do you think about capitalism and the distribution of wealth? What is your view of and reparations as a solution to inequality?
Well, I have written about this a lot, Pam. I am a capitalist, so I believe
former investment bank.
I mean, I am a believer that capitalism is the best way to organize an economic system. I do not believe the kind of capitalism that we have in America today is serving our democracy and is serving the long-term interests of this country. And so I believe we have reform work to do. That reform work needs to involve really interrogating the fundamental issue of labor capital allocation, the fundamental issue of the dignity of work. And as you said earlier, Pam, we now realize who are the essential workers.
Right.
We need to pay them a dignified wage. And so I want a capitalism that generates more shared prosperity. The issue of reparations is a complex issue, but it is an issue that needs to be on the table and discussed, because I think it will generate a way of thinking about how we need to redress some of the historic and systemic issues that remain with us today. Something you and I have talked about, Pam, just the black-white wealth gap. I mean, the lack of assets among African American households is in part due to systemic issues. Systemic issues like the fact that most white household wealth of the last 50 years has been generated from home ownership.
Yeah.
White soldiers coming home from the GI, getting a GI Bill and buying a nice house in the suburbs, passing that on to their children, grandchildren. African Americans never had that opportunity because the government itself, through the FHA, refused to support those housing developments in Black neighborhoods, and refused to ensure and redlined African American communities. We are still living with that, the consequences of that today.
Yeah. So what gives you hope? I was so encouraged when I reached out to you after the George Floyd murder, and just was checking in, and you wrote back, "I'm encouraged. You're really optimistic about the future." Are you still encouraged? It's been a couple months.
I am more encouraged, Pam. I am more encouraged. First of all, you and I are in the business of hope. When you get every day to come to work and give away money to make a difference in the lives of people, that's what we do. That gives me hope. But what really gives me hope are the conversations that I'm a part of and I am witnessing. What gives me hope is what I saw in the streets after the murder of George Floyd, something we have never had in America, a truly multiracial, multi-generational, international movement to acknowledge and bring to the fore the racial reckoning that we need in this country. We have never had this before. So I am encouraged and I am very optimistic. I was saying to a friend on a Zoom call in Europe last week, do not give up on America.
Yeah.
I am reminded of my favorite poet, Langston Hughes, and his great poem, Let America Be America Again. And the first stanza, he says, let America be America again. America never was America to me. But he ends the stanza, and yes, America someday will be. And even though Langston Hughes himself was the victim of discrimination and bigotry and prejudice in this country, and he was angry about that, he was still hopeful about America, and he was still optimistic in America's potential to deliver on its ideals. That's what I'm hopeful for. That's why I'm inspired.
Well, that is a wonderful way to lead us to our wrap up. So thank you so much, Darren. I'm so appreciative for your time and your insights and all the work that you're doing to inspire so many people. I want to thank our Fidelity Charitable donor community for listening in and continuing to be so committed to strategic giving at this time. You know, the actions we take today are critical, and it's really important that we continue to have a sense of urgency, that we give in an unrestricted way to support operating structure and costs at nonprofits, and third, that in collaboration. So keep safe and stay healthy, and thank you so much. Give for COVID relief now. Thanks, Darren. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.